discussion of the Governor Kasich's State of the State address last night in Sandusky. We're wearing these headphones because this also marks the return of the Buckeye Forum podcast, which you can find online at the Dispatch, at iTunes, etc. Jim, what was the governor seeking to do last night, you think, with his remarks that ranged some 70 minutes before a joint session of the General Assembly?
Well, he was seeking to go fast. I can tell you that. I've never seen the governor read a speech that quickly in my life, and he was blazing through that. And the fact that it still took over 70 minutes shows you just how many words he had down to read and how much he had to talk about. I mean, look, the governor has always been a great cheerleader for the state of Ohio, very good at promoting what the state does well and what he sees as a vision for what the state can do better and how we can progress into the future. So of course he did a lot of that. This speech was definitely light on any policy. I think you'd agree with that. There was really only one real policy initiative that he threw out there. I think it was a $20 million transfer from the Third Frontier program, and we'll talk some more about that to deal with some of the drug overdose epidemic that we have here in Ohio. But other than that, there wasn't a lot new. Most of it was just going back over some of his older proposals, talking about how Ohio has improved since he got into office, which we can also discuss some context there as well. But because it also has to do with the fact that Governor Kasich came into office as we were coming out of a great recession rather than in the middle of it or going into one. So yeah, I mean that's kind of what he was doing. He was he wasn't up there to propose a whole lot of new things. He was up there to praise his record, praise the state, and move along. I guess I'm not sure what kind of success he had with the legislators in the room, many of whom had heard much of what he has said before in different forms. But yeah, that was it.
Right. Again, if you were looking for news, there wasn't much red meat in this speech. Perhaps the biggest thing, or what his administration at least described as the biggest thing in his remarks last night, was a proposal to turn to the Third Frontier program, which is approved by voters about 15 years ago, to create a pool of bonded money to invest in technology to help assist jobs and job creation in Ohio. The governor is asking the board of the Third Frontier Commission, to which he appoints the members and effectively controls, to provide up to $20 million for promising technologies and treatments that will help perhaps battle Ohio's horrid opioid death and overdose crisis. This is described as funding that might get some promising new technologies out of the laboratory into the front line. How this specifically may work or what technologies this could be applied to, we're still trying to find out. Indeed, the Democrats reacted last night regarding the lack of details concerning this request to spend up to $20 million. The governor also continues to receive criticism, even from those who welcome this effort and this money, from not devoting more money to treatment. As a national leading 3,050 people died of drug overdoses in Ohio in 2015, and most expect that number to exceed over 4,000 once the numbers are in for last year. So we'll see how this unfolds. The only other perhaps minor nugget of new news, he also wants to create a task force of business industrial leaders and higher education, quote, thinkers, to see where the state of Ohio is perhaps going down the road, what we're going to lose in terms of jobs with increasing automation and robotics, and where we stand to potentially gain jobs in technology. And we'll see also where that goes as well. Kasich is very centered in this budget on trying to foster some initiatives to bring in high-tech jobs. Constantly cites autonomous vehicles that he says will be on the roads within 10 years. I myself doubt that, and I think some experts do. Drones and other things that he wants to bring in the jobs of the future to diversify the state economy. And of course, he says the workforce needs to be developed to handle those jobs. Jim, last night he also seemed to continue to push some things in his proposed state budget that would seem to be DOA before the legislature.
Yeah, and this has been done before. He at least didn't mention the severance tax this year. He's been beating that drum since probably for the last 6 years, trying to get an increase in the severance tax. So this is the tax that you pay for extracting oil and gas out of the ground, particularly through our fracking process in the shale out in the eastern Ohio. He didn't mention that, but he did mention, he put another plug in for his tax shifting proposals. He wants an income tax cut paid for largely with things like a sales tax increase and sales tax expansion and other things. The Republican legislators have already said they're not going along with that, and so I don't think anything he said this week is going to change that. They may do a minor income tax cut, but it's not going to look like what the governor has talked about, which is about a $3.1 billion tax cut, offset by about a $3.1 billion in tax increases. So that is going to go by the wayside. He talked up his teacher externship program, where he wants teachers to renew their license. In order to renew their license, they have to go out into the business community and do basically externships, spend time with businesses to learn what they're doing and what kind of skills they need from their workers. And again, this is something that both the Republican leaders in both chambers have both said they're not doing this. So there are massive logistic issues here to make that kind of thing work, and they just don't see it as being feasible. The teachers' unions have been heavily opposed to it as well, calling it very unnecessary. And there's, basically the argument is that why is, sending a second grade teacher into a manufacturing company to learn what they need, how is that really going to help that teacher teach better second grade, reading and math? And, I think people get the point that the governor is trying to do here, but I'm just not. A lot of folks have not been convinced this is the way to do it. So there were those issues that he talked about that that he tried to defend. But even then, even I would say, even compared to some past speeches, I think he was even lighter on defending his own budget than he has been in the past. Randy, he seemed to talk a lot more this time about things like we need to cooperate and come together as America. You may not be surprised to hear that Governor Kasich has a book coming out soon. And so I would guarantee you those are some of the themes he's going to touch on in his book, a book that I'm sure is going to contrast his view and vision of America with one President Trump. Were anything strike you, Randy, about any of that talk in there about?
Well, it's things we heard dating back to Kasich on the campaign trail while he was unsuccessfully running for president. And, which he spoke about polarization and liberals and conservatives are each locked into their own silo of information. And if this is fostering division, we're not looking for commonality. We're going to come together to try to solve problems jointly. He also continued last night to defend his Medicaid expansion before the General Assembly, even though he did an end run around the General Assembly to get that approved. Which now covers 700,000 more Ohioans.
I found that interesting, that when he talked about the Medicaid expansion and the fact that it's helping so many people in Ohio, including the mentally ill and the drug addicted, he got a very nice applause from the crowd for that. However, the legislative leaders, the Senate President Ossoff, Speaker Rosenberger, sitting right behind him, they didn't clap at all. They were dead still on that, even though the lines clearly were popular with many of those in the audience talking about Medicaid expansion. So that was an interesting moment there. I thought that we still have our legislative leaders still have not gotten past the opposition to the Medicaid expansion, even as we've been seeing it implemented here for the last couple of years.
Well, they dodged a bullet, as it were, at least in Kasich's view, when Congress failed to act on the Obamacare repeal and replace. if that happens and Ohio eventually loses that money, which has expanded treatment to 700,000 people, 500,000 of whom are receiving mental health and addiction treatment, trying to replace that money amid an opiate addiction crisis, you almost think that can't be done.
No, it can't. They won't. Those, if they lose Medicaid expansion, those folks will just lose health coverage. Ohio can't afford to pay for that, especially they're already seeing revenues on the downslide right now in terms of how they're coming up against projections. So, but it's just interesting that and both legislative leaders were asked afterward to talk about the fact that they weren't they did not applaud during those lines on Medicaid expansion and what they actually still think about Medicaid expansion, and some of them, and they did not want to say this is something that we should keep, this is something that we support. They were still they were not real enthusiastic about talking about the fact that the Republican plan, the Trump-Ryan plan, would have gotten rid of it, and so we're still a little unsure exactly what they think about those 700,000 people getting coverage right now and whether they should continue to get it.
Well, certainly, as you point out, the state cannot begin to fill that cost, considering the federal funds now pay for 90% of it. So we're talking billions of dollars, and if that is revoked, there simply doesn't appear much to be done to help cover the working poor and others who are now eligible for health care coverage.
Right, and and again, that plays a lot into Kasich's drug epidemic fight as well. He again mentioned yesterday in his speech that we've spent almost $1 billion a year on the drug fight. That the actual number is more like $940 million. However, like $650 million of that is just that Medicaid expansion population. So we're not talking about a small thing here. I mean, there is like a third of those on Medicaid expansion right now, I think, have some kind of mental health or drug addiction problem, and it is it is a legit crisis right now in the state. I mean, that word gets thrown around a little bit too much sometimes, but this is legit right now. We are seeing overdose death numbers that are just outrageous right now, and it's taxing our local officials or our local law enforcement and emergency services. And again, and the Democrats kind of were making some of this point, and I asked about it yesterday too from the Republicans, is we continue to talk about wanting to do more about this, but at the same time, our local governments are continuing to see they have not had their funding cuts restored that the state cut over the years, and in fact now a number of them are counties at least are looking to lose even more money from sales tax revenue losses because of some Medicaid managed care tax changes. So we can continue to do things in the state, and we are, to try to deal with this problem, but at the end of the day, at some point it is going to start taking more money, and I know that some of the Republicans were not real impressed with the $20 million that the governor talked about yesterday as being a key to the solution. They know more money needs to be spent, particularly on treatment. Right.
It was almost as if they went fishing for something they could put out there to center the state-to-state speech around, since it was lacking in new policy initiatives.
Yep. Yeah, I would say that's kind of what it looks like. But, so yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, like I said, there wasn't, as Randy said, there wasn't a whole lot of red meat in this State of the State speech. A lot of cheerleading, a lot of talk. Kasich talking about how our job numbers are up. However, as Randy has written recently, there are two sides of that story as well. Of course, we've gained jobs since 2011. So has the rest of the country. However, our job growth rate, half of what the national average is right now still?
Well, Ohio created half the number of new jobs last year, approximately 39,000 that it created the year before. And if you go year over year, February to February, from rankings compiled by the Carey School at Arizona State University, our job growth over those last 12 months ending in February was 36th in the nation. So obviously that leaves something to be desired. Our poverty has ticked down a bit to around the national average now. Our hourly wages, however, are doing better than the national average, although that is not being broadly shared, because median household income is still a few thousand below the national average. So Ohio continues to face economic challenges despite any so-called Ohio miracle, and I think the governor is trying to move to diversify the state economy, get some high-tech jobs in here. But again, that has to be aligned with workforce and education, and there's still a great deal of people out there with no real saleable job skills that the state needs to continue to try to upgrade the proficiency of its workforce.
Yeah, that's continuing to be a key problem in Ohio, is that we just don't have enough people either A, going to college, or B, doing any kind of post-high school training that trains them in the type of jobs that are being created now. And it's just a fact. We're well below the national average, national numbers on college graduates, and I know the governor is also working on some efforts here to try to improve access and continue to do that. But that remains. But I think a lot of that too is just a mindset issue. We've got to work on getting folks more in tune to the fact that you just can't graduate high school and go get a good job anymore. It hasn't been that way for a while, and it's only getting worse.
Well, I think we've provided hopefully a little more information and clarity today on the governor's State of the State address in Sandusky last night, Ohio's perch capital, and we enjoyed some last night, as did the governor. As noted, this does mark the return of the Buckeye Forum podcast, which you can find through dispatch.com and iTunes. Be sure to follow us and like us on Dispatch Politics on Facebook. Our entire public affairs staff can be found on Twitter as well. And as always, we are always breaking news and posting our coverage to dispatch.com, your leading source of news in Central Ohio. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.